the sound perfectly, a sharp crack that echoed across the garden as Marcus's hand connected with my face. 250 guests gasped in unison. I stood there at the altar in my wedding dress, white veil now askew, tasting blood from my split lip. The Pacific Ocean whispered behind us, indifferent to the destruction unfolding on this clifftop terrace. But it was what Marcus said next that truly shattered everything. "I can't marry you, Elena. I've been living a lie. I'm in love with Vivian." He turned to the front row, dropped to one knee before my younger sister, pulled out a different ring, bigger and flashier than the one he'd given me. "Vivian, will you marry me instead?" My sister covered her face with trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We tried to fight it, Marcus," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We really did." I scanned the crowd for shock, for sympathy, for outrage. Instead, I found something far worse. My mother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, but smiling. My father nodding slowly, approvingly. Aunts and uncles exchanging knowing glances like they were watching the finale of a show they'd already seen. They knew. They all knew. This wasn't Marcus's plan. This was a family execution. Something inside me didn't break. It unlocked. I caught my reflection in the massive ice sculpture behind the altar, the one shaped like intertwined hearts, and saw myself smiling. Not a broken smile, a dangerous one. They thought they'd orchestrated my destruction. They had no idea they'd just triggered mine. Everyone waited for me to collapse, to scream, to flee in humiliation like any normal bride would after being slapped and rejected in front of everyone she knew. The whispers started, building like waves before a storm. Someone in the back was already filming on their phone, but I stood perfectly still, hands steady, breathing even. 20 years of being this family's shock absorber had trained me well. I knew how to absorb pain without flinching, how to smile through devastation, how to make everyone else comfortable while I shattered quietly inside. Except this time, the stillness wasn't submission. It was calculation. My cheek throbbed where Marcus had struck me. Blood pooled at the corner of my lip, warm and metallic. I didn't wipe it away. Let them see what he'd done. Let the cameras capture it. Let the evidence mark itself on my skin. I became aware of specific details with almost supernatural clarity. The weight of my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd worn at her own wedding 60 years ago. The USB drive hidden inside my bouquet, pressing against my palm through the calla lily stems. The salt air from Monterey Bay mixing with the scent of $3,000 worth of roses I'd arranged myself because Marcus had been too busy to help with wedding planning. In the front row, I watched Marcus help Vivian to her feet, sliding that gaudy ring onto her finger. My mother rushed to embrace them both, crying happy tears. My father was checking his phone, probably confirming that whatever transaction they'd planned had gone through. And there, in the very back row, almost invisible among the chaos, stood Diane Chen, my grandmother's lawyer. The woman who'd handed me an envelope 6 weeks ago with instructions I'd followed to the letter. She gave me the slightest nod. Everything was in place. I could have walked away, disappeared into the crowd and let them have their victory, their company, their carefully constructed lies. Let them think they'd won. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, words she'd spoken from her hospital bed 6 months before she died. "Trust your instincts, Elena. The company is yours. Don't let them take it." I straightened my spine, adjusted my veil, and instead of running toward the exit, I walked toward the altar, toward the microphone. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Marcus's face shifted from triumph to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "Elena, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just go. We'll talk later." Vivian clutched his arm, still performing her tearful act. "Just let her leave, Marcus. She's embarrassing herself." I kept walking, heels clicking on the stone pathway, the train of my grandmother's dress, the one I'd chosen because she'd never gotten to see me married, dragging through scattered rose petals. My mother stepped into my path, That familiar expression on her face, the one she'd worn my entire life whenever I threatened to make a scene. "Elena, honey, let's go inside. Let's talk about this privately. There's no need for drama." I looked at her, really looked, saw the calculation behind the concern, the desperation masquerading as maternal love. "There's every need, Mother." She flinched, something in my eyes she didn't recognize, something that had finally stopped pretending. She stepped aside. "My name is Elena Hartwell. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent 12 years building Hartwell Hospitality Group into a $100 million empire. CFO by 30, the youngest executive in the company's history. I'd saved us from bankruptcy in 2012 when our competitors were folding. Negotiated the acquisition that doubled our portfolio in 2018. Turned this very resort, this clifftop property in Monterey where I was supposed to be married, into our crown jewel. And I was about to watch it all be stolen by the man I'd loved and the family that had never loved me back. They didn't know I'd discovered Marcus's secret 6 weeks ago. The emails he'd been sending to Crestwood Holdings, our biggest competitor. The files he'd stolen. The hostile takeover he'd been orchestrating from inside my own bed. They didn't know about the gift deed my parents had signed this morning, transferring 51% of company shares to Marcus as a wedding present. Shares that would make the takeover complete the moment I said I do. They didn't know about my grandmother's failsafe. The emergency succession clause she'd buried in the company bylaws 30 years ago, waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for the day her family's betrayal would finally surface. They thought I was walking toward humiliation. They had no idea I was walking toward war. I stepped up to the altar. The same microphone that had amplified the sound of Marcus hitting me now waited for my response. 250 people held their breath. Marcus grabbed for my arm, but security stepped forward, the team I'd briefed this morning who answered to me, not to him. "Before everyone leaves," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear, "I have something to share. It won't take long." I reached into my bouquet between the calla lily stems and pulled out the USB drive. Marcus's face went gray. Vivian stopped crying. My father half rose from his seat. "I thought about walking away," I continued, "letting you have your victory, your company, your carefully constructed lies." I plugged the USB into the resort's AV system. The screen behind the altar, the one that had been displaying our engagement photos, flickered. But then I remembered something my grandmother told me before she died. The screen came to life. The Crestwood Holdings logo appeared. An email header, Marcus's name in the sender field. The subject line visible to every guest, every camera, every witness. Hartwell acquisition, Phase 3 complete. 250 gasps, 250 phones rising to capture the screen. And Marcus, frozen at the altar, finally understanding that the trap had never been his. They wanted a wedding they'd never forget. I was about to give them one. But let me take you back. 3 months before that altar. Before I knew the full depth of their betrayal. Before I understood what I was truly fighting for. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night. The Hartwell Hospitality Group headquarters in San Francisco stood mostly dark, the offices empty except for the cleaning crew and one stubborn CFO who couldn't stop working. My corner office on the 23rd floor glowed with the blue light of 3 monitors, the city twinkling below like scattered diamonds against black velvet. This was my life. Stacks of quarterly reports, cold coffee growing a skin on top, the quiet hum of servers and the occasional distant vacuum cleaner, not glamorous, rarely appreciated, but mine. Marcus was supposed to pick me up for dinner 2 hours ago. His text had arrived at 7:30. Work emergency. Rain check? The 47th rain check in 4 months, not that I was counting. I'd told myself it was fine. We were both busy people. We'd have plenty of time together after the wedding. I was running a standard security audit on the company servers, a habit my grandmother had drilled into me when she'd first promoted me to CFO 6 years earlier. "Trust, but verify, Elena," she used to say, especially with family. I'd always assumed she meant my father's spending habits. his tendency to approve expenses without reading the fine print, his general disinterest in the details that kept the company running. I had no idea she meant something far worse. The anomaly appeared on my third monitor at 11:52. A file transfer log that didn't match any authorized activity. 53 megabytes. Sent at 2:47 in the morning last Thursday to an external server I didn't recognize. My first thought was security breach. A hack. Something to escalate to IT in the morning and then forget about once they'd patched whatever vulnerability had been exploited. But the access credentials weren't from a stranger. They were from a guest login I'd created myself. The one I'd made for Marcus for convenience so he could use my office when he visited. So he could print documents or check his email while waiting for me to finish meetings. There had to be an explanation. He'd probably clicked something by accident, forwarded something to himself for legitimate reasons. Maybe he'd been helping with something I'd forgotten about. I opened the transfer log, traced the files. The list made my stomach drop. Q3 financial projections, marked confidential. Board meeting minutes from the last 6 months, also confidential. Our property acquisition pipeline, which was restricted to C-suite executives only. Our complete debt structure analysis, information that could destroy us in the wrong hands. And then I saw the attachment name that stopped my heart completely. Hartwell Acquisition Timeline. Phase 3. Acquisition? We weren't acquiring anyone. We weren't being acquired. What was Phase 3? What had been Phase 1 and Phase 2? I traced the external server through 3 layers of corporate obscurity. Shell companies registered in Delaware, the Caymans, and Luxembourg. The kind of structure designed to hide ownership, to make accountability impossible. But I'd seen this exact pattern before. In 2018, when I'd conducted a comprehensive competitor analysis, when I'd studied every major player in the hospitality industry to identify potential acquisition targets and threats. Crestwood Holdings, our biggest rival, the company that had tried to buy us out twice, in 2014 and 2017, the company whose CEO had stood in this very building and told my grandmother that he'd own her legacy one way or another. Marcus was sending our most sensitive data directly to our enemy. Every file, every secret, every vulnerability. My hands started shaking. My stomach turned over, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to keep from being sick. The coffee I'd been nursing threatened to come back up. This couldn't be right. I was misreading something. There was an explanation. I checked the logs again. And again. The data didn't change. The timestamps didn't lie. The file names didn't rearrange themselves into something innocent. My thumb hovered over Marcus's contact photo on my phone. That smile I'd fallen in love with. Those eyes that looked at me like I mattered. I could call him right now, demand answers, give him a chance to explain. But my grandmother's voice stopped me. Never confront until you have the complete picture. Partial information is a weapon in their hands, not yours. She'd taught me that when I was 24, dealing with a vendor who'd been overcharging us for years. Wait, she'd said. Watch. Gather everything, then strike once and strike completely. I put the phone down and went deeper. Marcus's guest login history revealed 6 months of systematic data extraction. Timed perfectly, always when I was traveling for business. Always when he had alone time in my office, waiting for me like a loving fiancé while actually downloading our company's secrets. He wasn't careless. He was methodical, professional, trained. And then I found something I hadn't been looking for. Cached browser data from an email account I didn't recognize. He'd forgotten to log out on my system. The inbox preview showed dozens of messages from someone identified only as V heart emojis, selfies, and one line that burned itself into my memory forever. Can't wait to be rid of her. Soon, baby. Phase 3 is almost complete. The timestamps went back 8 months. The photos left nothing to imagination. And the V, I realized with a sickening certainty, could only be one person. The only V in our social circle. The only one who'd been spending so much time with Marcus lately, supposedly bonding with her future brother-in-law. Vivian, my sister. I sat in my dark office for a long time, the screens casting blue shadows across my face. The question wasn't who to tell, it was who to trust. Not my parents. They'd been favoring Vivian since the day she was born. Not the board, half of whom owed their positions to my father's patronage. Not HR, not legal, not any of the systems designed to protect the company because Marcus had probably mapped all of them. One name surfaced. Diane Chen, my grandmother's personal attorney for 30 years. The woman who'd handled the estate after grandmother passed 6 months ago. The one person my grandmother had trusted absolutely. At her funeral, Diane had squeezed my hand and whispered 5 words. "When you need me, call." I dialed her personal number at 1:23 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, alert and unsurprised, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Diane," I said, my voice cracking for the first time all night. "I found something. About Marcus. About Crestwood. I need help." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said words that changed everything. "I was wondering when you'd discover it." The next afternoon, I sat in Diane's private office on Montgomery Street. Not her main firm, but a separate space she kept for matters requiring absolute discretion. A locked box sat on her desk, and she opened it with a small brass key. "Your grandmother gave me this 4 months before she died," Diane explained. Instructions were specific. Give it to Elena Hartwell if and when she discovers a threat to the company from within. "From within?" I repeated. She thought family would betray us? Diane's smile was sad and knowing. She knew family already had. She just couldn't prove who or how. She slid an envelope across the desk. Heavy cream paper. My grandmother's handwriting, elegant and precise and heartbreakingly familiar. The words on the front read, "Open only in crisis." "There's something else," Diane continued. "Something she embedded in the company bylaws 30 years ago. An emergency clause that no one knows about. Not your father, not the board, not anyone." "What kind of clause?" She pushed a second document toward me. Legal text. Dense and complicated. With sections highlighted in yellow. The kind that can stop a hostile takeover cold. The kind that puts you in control of everything if you're brave enough to use it. I stared at my grandmother's handwriting. At the weapon she'd forged decades before I'd ever need it. At the protection she'd built for a moment she'd somehow known would come. Phase 3 of their plan was almost complete. They had no idea I was about to start my own. The envelope from my grandmother stayed locked in my home safe for 3 weeks. I wasn't ready to open it. Not until I understood the full scope of what I was facing. Not just from Marcus, from my own family. 1 month after my discovery, 2 months before the wedding, my parents organized what they called a family bonding dinner at the Monterey Resort. Sunday evening, private dining room, the whole clan gathered to celebrate the upcoming nuptials. That's how my mother pitched it when she called. A chance for everyone to spend quality time together before the big day. Before my discovery, I would have believed her. I would have seen a family dinner. Now I saw a crime scene. The private dining room overlooked the Pacific, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a sunset that painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Crystal glasses sparkled on white tablecloth. The string quartet I'd hired for the wedding played softly in the corner, a preview of the ceremony to come. My parents sat at the head of the table, Richard and Catherine Hartwell, patriarch and matriarch of a dynasty built on my grandmother's sweat and my labor. Vivian glowed beside Marcus in a sundress that probably cost more than my assistant's monthly salary. And Marcus himself sat too close to my sister, their chairs angled toward each other in a way that would have seemed innocent a month ago. I watched them all with new eyes, every gesture, every glance, every word that carried double meaning. My mother launched into her usual routine, asking Vivian about her art projects, the watercolors that never sold, the pottery classes she'd abandoned after 3 sessions, the creative pursuits that generated nothing but expenses and excuses. "Such talent," my mother cooed. "You really should have your own gallery showing, sweetheart." My father laughed too loudly at something Marcus said about golf. A sport Marcus had only taken up after learning it was how my father conducted business deals. The bonding had been strategic from the start. I just hadn't seen it. I decided to test the waters. The Tokyo partnership signed yesterday, I announced during a lull in the conversation. 12 million annually, plus expansion rights across the Asian market. It's the biggest international deal in company history. My father glanced at me like I'd mentioned the weather. That's great, Elena. He turned immediately back to Marcus. So tell us more about this consulting opportunity you mentioned. Sounds fascinating. 12 years of building this company. The deal that would secure our future for a decade. Dismissed in half a sentence. Watching my mother reach across the table to fix a strand of Vivian's hair, that automatic gesture of tenderness, triggered something I'd buried long ago. Memories I'd trained myself not to think about. I was 12 years old, standing backstage at my piano recital. 6 months of practice for this night. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece my teacher said most adults couldn't master. I'd played it perfectly, every note precise, every emotion conveyed. When I came out for my bow, I searched the audience for my parents' faces. Their seats were empty. I found them in the parking lot afterward, my father fanning a pale-faced Vivian who'd felt faint in the heat. "You understand, don't you, honey?" my mother had said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your sister needed us." I was 16, holding my acceptance letter to Phillips Exeter Academy. Full scholarship, one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country. My hands trembled as I showed my mother. "That's nice, honey," she'd said, barely glancing at the letter. "Can you help Vivian with her college essays? She's really struggling." I was 22, watching my mother give a toast at my grandmother's 70th birthday party. The celebration I'd spent 3 months planning, every detail perfect. Vivian had shown up with a store-bought card and a gift still in the shopping bag, price tag attached. To Margaret, my mother had said, raising her glass, and to Vivian, who reminds us all to live in the moment and not worry so much about the details. That night, my grandmother had found me alone on the terrace, staring at the ocean. Her hand had covered mine, warm and steady. "I see you, Elena," she'd whispered. "I've always seen you. Don't let their blindness make you invisible." Now, sitting at this dinner table 2 decades later, I finally understood what she'd meant. I'd spent my whole life believing that if I worked harder, achieved more, proved myself beyond any doubt, they would finally see me. They would finally love me the way they loved Vivian. But they'd always seen me. They just didn't value what they saw. I was useful. I was reliable. I was the one who fixed problems and managed crises and kept the machinery running. But I wasn't special. I wasn't precious. I wasn't Vivian. This wasn't about earning love anymore. It was about accepting I'd never have it, not from them. Vivian leaned forward, touching my arm with sisterly affection. "Elena, you work so hard. Don't you ever want to just enjoy life?" She exchanged a glance with Marcus. "We were just saying you should take a vacation after the wedding. Marcus and I can handle things here while you're gone." The words hit differently now that I knew what they really meant. We can handle things, already positioning themselves to take over, already planning my obsolescence. I smiled the smile I'd perfected over decades. "That's sweet of you to think of me." My father mentioned the upcoming board meeting, some routine business about quarterly reviews. Vivian, without thinking, jumped in. "Oh, is that the one where you're announcing the gift transfer? Marcus told me about the—" She caught herself mid-sentence. Marcus's face went pale. My parents exchanged a look that lasted half a second too long. My mother recovered first. "Vivian, honey, that's not finalized yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I kept my expression neutral. "Gift transfer?" My father waved dismissively. "Just some estate restructuring. Nothing you need to worry about, Elena. Your mother and I are handling it." Marcus leaned forward, his voice carefully casual. "Richard, Catherine, should we discuss this privately later?" I watched them all scramble to cover the slip. The gift deed. 51% of company shares, transferred to Marcus as a wedding present. I'd seen the draft in the files he'd sent to Crestwood. The document that would make him majority owner the moment we said our vows. My entire family was in on it. The conspiracy wasn't just Marcus and Vivian, it was everyone at this table. Of course, I said, reaching for my wine glass. I'm sure you know best. After dinner, I excused myself to check on a staffing issue at the resort. Standard Elena behavior. Always working, even at family events. No one questioned it, no one ever did. I walked through the property I'd helped design, the gardens I'd landscaped, the lighting I'd specified. Every detail bore my fingerprints. And they were planning to hand it all to strangers who would gut it for profit and rename it Crestwood Monterey. I didn't plan to go to the VIP wing, but something pulled me there. Some instinct I'd learned to trust. Suite 7. The presidential suite. Marcus always insisted on staying there when he visited, claiming he needed space to work. I heard laughter through the door. Voices I recognized. The staff master key had been in my pocket for 12 years. I didn't use it. I didn't need to. The balcony doors were open to catch the ocean breeze, and sound carries. After the wedding, we won't have to hide anymore. Vivian's voice, dreamy and satisfied. Once the shares are his, she's irrelevant. 6 more weeks, baby. Marcus, confident and casual. Then we take everything. Crestwood's already approved the merger terms, he continued. By September, Hartwell Hospitality won't even exist as a brand, and Elena won't see any of it coming. I stood in the hallway, listening to my fiancé and my sister plan my destruction. And something strange happened. The devastation I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a cold clarity spreading through my chest. Ice where fire should have been. They needed the wedding. The gift deed activated upon marriage. They couldn't steal the company without me saying I do. Which meant I had all the power. They just didn't know it yet. I walked back to my car with steady steps and dry eyes. Sat in the driver's seat and watched Marcus and Vivian leave the resort together, arms wrapped around each other, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I called Diane. I'm ready to open the envelope, I said. I'll meet you in an hour, and Elena, bring everything you've found. I started the engine, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. Trust your instincts. The company is yours. Don't let them take it. I'm bringing a war, I told Diane. And I hung up the phone. The fog hadn't lifted by the time I reached Diane's office. Fitting. I was about to step into clarity that had been hidden for 30 years. 11:43 at night, 6 weeks before my wedding. Diane's private office on Montgomery Street sat in a building most people walked past without noticing. No nameplate on the door, no listing in the lobby directory, the kind of space you maintained when your clients needed absolute discretion. The locked box from our first meeting sat open on her desk. Inside, the envelope waited. Heavy cream paper, yellowed slightly with age. My grandmother's handwriting, elegant and precise. Open only in crisis. I'd carried this envelope in my mind for 3 weeks, imagining what it contained. Legal documents, probably. Instructions for various scenarios. The practical wisdom of a woman who'd built an empire from nothing and understood exactly how fragile empires could be. But sitting there in the dim light of Diane's office, the envelope in my hands, I realized I'd been avoiding something deeper. Once I opened this, everything changed. There would be no more pretending, no more playing the role of obedient daughter, dutiful fiancé, invisible sister. This envelope was a line in the sand. Take your time, Diane said softly. Your grandmother wanted you to be ready. I slid my thumb under the flap. The old glue gave way easily, as if the envelope had been waiting for this exact moment. Inside I found 3 handwritten pages, a small velvet pouch, and a folded legal document dense with highlighted text. And something else. The faint scent of Chanel No. 5, my grandmother's signature perfume, somehow still clinging to the paper after all these months. She was here with me, even now. My dearest Elena, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've done what I always believed you would. You fought. You've won, or at least you've started fighting, and now I need to tell you something I should have said while I was alive." The tears came before I finished the first paragraph. I'd thought I was prepared. I wasn't. "I was 23 when I married your grandfather," she wrote. "Not for love, for survival. My own family had cast me out. I was the eldest daughter, the responsible one, the one who questioned too much and obeyed too little. Sound familiar? I built Hartwell Hospitality because I had no other choice. No family to fall back on, no safety net. Just my own 2 hands and a stubbornness that everyone mistook for coldness. They called me the Ice Queen even back then. I took it as a compliment." The parallel between her story and mine made my chest ache. She'd been the forgotten daughter too, the one who worked while others were celebrated, the one who built while others inherited. "When your father was born," she continued, "I swore he would never feel unwanted the way I had. I gave him everything. Too much, I realize now. I created the very entitlement I'd fled from in my own family. And when he married Catherine, when Vivian was born, I watched the pattern repeat. The golden child, the invisible one, you. I saw what they were doing to you, Elena. Every dismissed achievement, every overlooked milestone. Every time they chose Vivian's tears over your triumphs, I saw it all, and I'm sorry, so sorry that I didn't stop it." The apology broke something in me. All those years of feeling unseen, and she'd been watching the whole time. Loving me from a distance because loving me openly would have made things worse. "I tried in my way," she wrote, quietly, behind the scenes. "I couldn't change their hearts. God knows I tried. But I could change the rules, every position you earned at the company, every promotion, every responsibility. I made sure the path was there. You still had to walk it. But I cleared the obstacles I could. I set the letter down, needing to breathe. The promotions I'd thought I'd earned purely on merit. The opportunities that had seemed like luck or good timing. She'd been advocating for me all along. Not handing me success, but making sure the doors weren't locked against me. A memory surfaced with sudden force. 6 months ago, Stanford Hospital, the last time I saw her alive. She'd been lying in the private room, machines beeping their quiet countdown. Her hand in mine felt like paper stretched over stubborn bones. But her eyes were still sharp, even through the morphine haze. "Come closer, Elena." Her voice had been barely a whisper. "There are things I need to tell you." I'd leaned in, expecting final words of love or wisdom. Instead, she'd said something that confused me completely at the time. "Marcus, there's something wrong with him. I can feel it." I'd smiled and kissed her forehead. "Grandmother, you're being protective. He loves me. We're happy." Her grip had tightened with surprising strength. I had him investigated. The report came back incomplete. Too many gaps, too many questions. "Promise me you'll be careful." But I'd been in love. Certain of Marcus in a way I'd never been certain of anything. I'd dismissed her concerns as the paranoia of a dying woman, too protective of her favorite grandchild. "Trust your instincts, Elena. The company is yours. Don't let them take it." Those were the last coherent words she'd spoken to me. 3 days later, she was gone. And I'd spent those 3 days planning my wedding instead of sitting by her bedside, because Marcus had convinced me she'd want me to focus on the future. Now, reading her letter, I understood. She'd tried to warn me, and I'd chosen Marcus over her final days. The guilt was crushing, but beneath it something else grew. Resolution. I would honor what she'd tried to protect. I would be worthy of the faith she'd placed in me. Diane watched me set the letter down. "There's more," she said gently. "The legal document." She walked me through it page by page. Section 7, subsection C of the company bylaws. The Emergency Succession Clause, established in 1994. "Your grandmother embedded this during the incorporation restructuring," Diane explained. "No one noticed. It was buried in pages of standard corporate language. Your father certainly never read it. He never reads anything." The clause was elegant in its simplicity. In the event of proven fraud, hostile takeover attempt, or breach of fiduciary duty by family members, the sitting chief financial officer could freeze all pending transactions and assume temporary control of the company pending board review. She made sure you became CFO, Diane continued. She made sure you were the one holding this power, not your father, not the board. You. There's more, Diane said, her voice careful. Something I discovered while investigating Marcus's background. She slid a photograph across the desk. A man in his 70s, silver-haired, distinguished. The CEO of Crestwood Holdings. His name is Victor Ashford, and 40 years ago, he was engaged to your mother. I stared at the photograph. My mother's college sweetheart was now orchestrating the destruction of my family's company. The man she'd left to marry my father was using my fiancé to steal everything my grandmother had built. I don't know if your mother is involved willingly, Diane said, or if she's being manipulated. But Elena, this goes back further than Marcus. This might go back 40 years. It didn't matter, not yet. First, I had to stop the takeover. Then I could untangle the history. What do you want to do? Diane asked. The answer came to me fully formed, surprising in its clarity. I want to give them exactly what they're expecting. Diane frowned. You want to go through with the wedding? I want them to think they've won. I want them so confident, so arrogant, so certain of their victory that they expose themselves completely. The gift deed activates at the wedding. Marcus needs to marry me for the shares to transfer. Understanding dawned in her eyes. And if they stop the wedding themselves, then the gift deed is void. And if they stop it while I'm recording everything, with evidence of the Crestwood conspiracy on display, the emergency succession clause activates. They destroy themselves. I just have to give them the stage. Diane studied me for a long moment. This is dangerous. If they discover you know, they won't. I stood, gathering the envelope, the letter, the velvet pouch I hadn't yet opened. They've never seen me as a threat. That's their biggest mistake. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prepare what would look like a wedding, but would function as an execution. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I was going to learn exactly how to use it. 6 weeks of preparation. 42 days of smiling at people who wanted me destroyed. And now, the morning of my wedding. 6:17 in the morning. The bridal suite at Hartwell Resort. My creation. First light bled through the silk curtains, casting the room in shades of pearl and rose. The Pacific crashed against the cliffs below, the same rhythm it had kept for millennia, indifferent to the human drama about to unfold on its shores. I'd been awake for an hour already, sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the darkness slowly surrender to dawn. The bed behind me lay half empty, Marcus's side untouched. He'd stayed at a hotel last night, he'd said, to keep tradition. I knew he'd stayed with Vivian. One last night together before they'd be free to stop hiding. They thought I didn't know. I was counting on it. My bridesmaids had offered to stay overnight, to keep me company, to pour champagne and giggle about wedding night nerves the way bridesmaids were supposed to. I'd declined. My mother had suggested a girls' morning, manicures and mimosas before the ceremony. I'd said I needed the time alone to center myself. The truth was simpler. This wasn't wedding preparation. This was battle preparation. And soldiers don't bring spectators to war. I rose from the chair and began my ritual. Earl Grey with honey, brewed in the small kitchenette, the same tea my grandmother had drunk every morning of her life. I carried the cup to the window and looked down at the garden where the ceremony would take place in less than 5 hours. Staff members moved like ants across the lawn, arranging 250 white chairs in perfect rows. The flower team was setting up the arrangements I'd designed, cascades of calla lilies and white roses against a backdrop of Pacific blue. The string quartet was doing a sound check under the arbor where I would stand next to Marcus and pretend I wanted to marry him. $87,000. That's what this wedding had cost, paid entirely from my personal account because Marcus was between consulting contracts, Every vendor, every detail, every napkin fold had been my decision because he'd been too busy with work to help plan our future. Now I understood what work he'd actually been doing. I set down the teacup and moved to the closet where my dress hung in its protective bag. Vera Wang, $15,000. My grandmother had offered to pay for it before she died, one of her last gifts to me. The silk whispered as I unzipped the bag and ran my fingers over the intricate beadwork. They expected this dress to be my shroud. Instead, it would be my armor. I checked my weapons one by one. The bouquet first, stored in the mini refrigerator to keep the flowers fresh. I'd chosen calla lilies and white roses, elegant and classic, and nestled inside the stem wrap, invisible unless you knew where to look, the USB drive containing 6 weeks of evidence. Every email Marcus had sent to Crestwood, every file he'd stolen, every message between him and Vivian planning my destruction. Next, the jewelry. My grandmother's pearl earrings lay in their velvet case on the vanity, beautiful, sentimental. And in the right earring, a micro-recorder so small it was invisible to the naked eye. Diane's suggestion, just in case they say something useful before the ceremony. My phone was fully charged, backup cloud-enabled, recording app tested 3 times. A second USB drive was taped inside my clutch, insurance in case something happened to the first. Copies of everything sat in Diane's safe across the city. Nothing left to chance. No variable unaccounted for. I stood before the full-length mirror in my robe, studying my own reflection. The woman looking back at me appeared calm. Rested, even. No dark circles despite the sleepless nights of planning. No tension in the jaw despite weeks of performing love for a man I now despised. I practiced the smile. Not the fake one I'd worn for Marcus and my family. The other one. The dangerous one. The smile I'd show them when they thought they'd won. A knock at the door interrupted my rehearsal. 8:30, right on schedule. My mother swept into the room in a champagne silk suit, her hair already perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. The picture of a proud mother of the bride. Only her eyes betrayed her, darting around the room, assessing, calculating. "Oh, sweetheart, you're not even started yet?" She rushed toward me with performed concern. "Let me help you get ready." "Thanks, Mom." I kept my voice warm, my expression grateful. I was just enjoying the quiet. She began fussing with things that didn't need fussing. Adjusting the flowers on the vanity, straightening picture frames, checking her phone every few minutes with studied casualness. "You seem so calm, Elena." She turned to face me, something almost like suspicion in her eyes. "Aren't you nervous at all?" I held her gaze. Should I be? The flinch was barely perceptible, but I caught it. The slight widening of her eyes, the quick recovery. No, of course not. It's just most brides are bundles of nerves. You're so composed." I smiled my practiced smile. "I learned from the best, Mom. Nothing rattles a Hartwell woman." 9:15. Another knock, though this one didn't wait for permission to enter. Vivian burst through the door in her maid of honor dress, emerald green, a color she'd chosen herself over my mild objections. She was glowing with an energy that had nothing to do with wedding excitement. "There's my beautiful big sister." She threw her arms around me in an embrace that felt like a python testing its prey. "Are you ready for the best day of your life?" The irony was almost too perfect. She meant those words sincerely, just not in the way she was pretending. "I've never been more ready," I said, returning the hug. And I caught it, the slight stiffening of her body. The guilt she couldn't quite suppress when she touched the sister she was about to betray. Over her shoulder, I watched my mother's reflection in the mirror. She and Vivian exchanged a glance, quick and loaded with meaning, confirmation, reassurance. Everything is on track. Yes, I thought, it certainly is. They left after 20 minutes of chatter, ostensibly to check on the caterer. Really to coordinate with Marcus, to run through whatever final preparations their conspiracy required. The moment the door closed behind them, I felt my shoulders drop. The performance was exhausting. Every smile cost something. My phone buzzed, Diane's name on the screen, everything in place, legal team on standby. Board members I trust have been quietly briefed. The moment you activate the clause, we move. I typed back a single word. Ready. Her response came immediately. Elena, remember, no matter what happens today, you've already won. The evidence is secured. Even if something goes wrong at the ceremony, we have enough to stop them. I read the message twice. A safety net, a backup plan, the luxury of knowing I couldn't truly lose no matter how the next few hours played out. But something could still go wrong. Marcus might not go through with the public humiliation, though his arrogance and Crestwood's pressure made that unlikely. They might discover the recording devices, though the pearls looked completely normal. They might have planned something worse than I'd anticipated. The one variable I couldn't control was myself. When Marcus hit me, and I knew he would because the emails had discussed making it dramatic, would I maintain composure? Would I remember the plan? Would I smile through the blood and the shock and the humiliation of being struck in front of everyone I knew? I picked up my grandmother's earrings, held them in my palm, warm from the velvet case, smooth against my skin. I'm doing this for you, I whispered to the empty room. For everything you built. For every time you saw me when no one else did, I hope I made you proud. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation, the dress sliding over my shoulders, the zipper closing like a declaration of war, the veil pinned into place, the same veil that would be knocked askew before the hour was out. I applied my own makeup, waterproof everything, not for happy tears. The earrings went on last. A tiny click as the recorder activated. I looked at myself in the mirror one final time. Not a bride. A warrior in silk and pearls. A woman about to burn her old life to the ground and build something better from the ashes. This is the last time I pretend, I told my reflection. After today, they see the real me, whether they like it or not. A knock at the door. My father's voice, muffled through the wood. Elena, it's time. Everyone's waiting. I picked up my bouquet, felt the USB drive press against my palm through the flower stems, took one last breath of the old Elena, the one who accommodated, who made herself small, who accepted crumbs and called them love. Coming, Dad. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The garden waited below, 250 guests, one altar, and a trap that had been 30 years in the making. They were waiting to destroy me. They had no idea I was walking toward my own resurrection. The USB slid into the port. The resort's AV system hummed to life, the same system I'd designed 3 years ago when we renovated this property. The screen behind the altar flickered from the wedding slideshow, those carefully curated photos of Marcus and me looking happy, to something else entirely. 250 people fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. The Crestwood Holdings logo appeared first, corporate letterhead, professional, damning. Then the email header materialized, crisp and clear on the 12-foot screen, from Marcus Thorne to Victor Ashford, CEO Crestwood Holdings. Subject line, Hartwell Acquisition Phase 3 Status Update. I watched the realization spread through the crowd like a wave. Confused murmurs became gasps. Gasps became stunned silence. Every phone in the garden rose simultaneously, recording the evidence, capturing the moment, documenting the destruction of the man who'd just slapped me at our wedding. Someone in the back shouted, "What is this? What's happening?" I didn't answer. I let the emails speak for themselves. The screen scrolled to the next message. Board meeting confirmed the expansion. Hartwell is overextended. Perfect timing for hostile acquisition. Then another. Elena suspects nothing. She's too focused on wedding planning. By the time she realizes what's happened, the merger will be complete. And another. Once the shares transfer through the gift deed, we move to Phase 4. Complete dissolution of the Hartwell brand. Crestwood Monterey has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Marcus lunged toward the screen. Elena, stop this. You don't know what you're doing. Just let me explain. Security stepped forward. The same team I'd briefed at 6 this morning. They answered to me, not to him. Not anymore. I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady despite the blood still drying on my lip. Everyone deserves to see what they came here to witness. A union. Just not the one they expected. Corporate espionage wasn't enough for them, I continued. Let me show you what else my fiancé has been doing with his time. The screen changed. Screenshots now. Text messages from the secret email account Marcus had forgotten to log out of on my computer. The conversation with V that had shattered whatever remained of my denial. Can't wait to be rid of her. Soon, baby. Phase 3 is almost complete. She's so pathetic, still planning the wedding colors while we're planning her destruction. After we have the company, we'll finally be free. No more pretending. Vivian's face had gone white. She clutched Marcus's arm, her maid of honor dress suddenly looking like a costume from a very bad play. Marcus, do something. Make her stop. But Marcus couldn't do anything. No one could. The evidence was playing for 250 witnesses, and an unknown number of phone cameras that would upload to social media within minutes. I pressed another button on the remote. But perhaps you don't believe screenshots. Perhaps you think I fabricated these messages. Audio filled the garden, crystal clear, unmistakable. 6 more weeks of pretending she's my sister instead of my obstacle. Vivian's voice, recorded 2 weeks ago when she'd thought I was in San Francisco. Then Marcus. Crestwood's already drawing up the merger documents. By September, Hartwell Hospitality won't exist as a brand, and Elena won't even see it coming. Vivian's laugh, bright and cruel, and when she does, it'll be too late. Poor Elena. She actually thinks people love her. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. In the front row, Marcus's parents sat frozen. His mother had her hand pressed over her mouth. His father, David Thorne, had risen to his feet, his expression unreadable. They hadn't known. I could see that clearly now. They'd believed their son had found love. My own parents hadn't moved. My father's face had turned a peculiar shade of gray. My mother's eyes darted between me and Vivian and the screen, calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this, an escape route that didn't exist. Marcus broke free from the security team's loose hold and strode toward me. His charming mask had shattered completely. In its place, something ugly and desperate. Elena, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. I can explain everything. Just turn off the screen and let's talk privately. I looked at him, really looked, at the man I'd planned to spend my life with, the man I'd trusted with my company, my family, my heart. Explain what? I asked, my voice carrying through the microphone. The corporate espionage? The affair with my sister? The fact that you were planning to steal a company my grandmother spent 40 years building? He had no answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus Thorne had nothing to say. Vivian pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. The performance of a lifetime, though the audience was no longer buying tickets. Elena, please. I'm your sister. We can work this out. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we're family. We can fix this. I turned to face her. My baby sister, the golden child. The one who'd been chosen every single time while I'd been overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. A mistake is forgetting a birthday, I said. A mistake is missing a phone call. You tried to destroy my life. You called me pathetic while planning my destruction. You don't get to call that a mistake. She turned to our parents, desperate. Mom, Dad, tell her we can fix this as a family. The silence from our parents was damning, complete. They had no defense left. My father finally spoke, trying to summon the authority he'd wielded for decades. Elena, this is enough. You've made your point. Now let's handle this privately. The company needs stable leadership, and the board will want to discuss... Privately? I interrupted. Like you privately signed over 51% of my company to a corporate spy this morning? His face went slack. How did you know about... I've known for 6 weeks, Father. While you were planning my humiliation, I was planning your accountability. My mother stepped forward, finally unfreezing. Richard, you said she'd never find out. You promised this would be clean. The words hung in the air. Confession, admission, evidence. So you did know, I said quietly. Both of you. You knew what Marcus was, and you helped him anyway. Movement at the back of the garden caught my eye. Diane Chen walking up the aisle, briefcase in hand, 2 associates flanking her, right on time. The crowd parted for her instinctively. She radiated the kind of calm authority that made people step aside without knowing why. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diane announced, her voice clear and professional. "I apologize for the interruption. I'm Diane Chen, legal counsel for Hartwell Hospitality Group." She held up a document, thick with highlighted sections and legal seals. Pursuant to Section 7, subsection C of the company bylaws, the emergency succession clause established in 1994, I am here to witness the activation of emergency protocols. Evidence of external hostile takeover conspiracy and fiduciary breach by family members has been established and documented. Marcus's face drained of all remaining color. He recognized Diane. He'd seen her at the office, knew she'd been my grandmother's lawyer, and now he understood what that meant. I stepped forward, my voice carrying across the silent garden. As Chief Financial Officer of Hartwell Hospitality Group, I hereby invoke the Emergency Succession Clause. All pending transactions are frozen effective immediately. This includes the gift deed signed this morning by Richard and Catherine Hartwell, transferring 51% of company shares to Marcus Thorne. Diane nodded, making notes. For the record, the gift deed is hereby voided. The transfer never occurred. Mr. Thorne has no ownership stake in Hartwell Hospitality Group. My father's voice cracked. "Elena, you can't do this." I met his eyes. I just did. Marcus stumbled backward, the reality finally hitting him. "You planned this. From the beginning, you knew what we were doing, and you let us—" "I let you dig your own grave," I said. "You were very thorough, I'll give you that." His face contorted. The slap. "You wanted me to hit you. You needed it to happen in front of everyone." I smiled. The dangerous smile. The one I'd practiced in the mirror. "You gave me the perfect opening. Public assault, in front of 250 witnesses, right before committing corporate fraud. Thank you, Marcus. I couldn't have done this without you." Security moved in, not to restrain him exactly, but to make clear he wouldn't be leaving on his own terms. In the back, I could see board members already on their phones, investors talking urgently with their assistants, the machinery of business grinding into action. Vivian had collapsed into a chair, her emerald dress pooling around her. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring at nothing, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. My parents stood frozen, suddenly old and small in their expensive wedding clothes. I removed my veil, letting it drop to the ground where it settled like a fallen ghost. The wedding was over. A new chapter had just begun. They'd wanted a ceremony they'd never forget. I'd given them an execution they'd never outlive. I walked away from the altar, not as a bride, not as a victim, as the new head of Hartwell Hospitality Group. And I didn't look back. 2 hours. That's how long it took for a 30-year conspiracy to completely unravel. 1:47 in the afternoon. The wedding that wasn't had become the scandal that would be remembered for decades. The garden where I'd been slapped, proposed to by proxy and publicly humiliated, had transformed into something unrecognizable. White chairs lay overturned across the lawn. Champagne glasses sat abandoned on tables, bubbles long gone flat. The altar where my life had shattered stood empty, surrounded by security personnel and a growing crowd of lawyers. The resort had shifted into crisis mode. Phones rang constantly at the front desk. Staff rushed between floors carrying documents, fielding calls, trying to manage the unmanageable. Guests who'd come for a wedding were checking out early, not wanting their names associated with what the media was already calling the Hartwell wedding scandal. News vans had appeared in the parking lot within 40 minutes of the ceremony's spectacular end. Photographers clustered at the gates, telephoto lenses pointed at anyone entering or leaving. Someone had leaked the video, or maybe everyone had leaked it. By now, the footage of Marcus slapping me, proposing to Vivian, and then being exposed as a corporate spy had probably circled the globe twice. I moved through the chaos like a general surveying a battlefield, issuing orders, delegating tasks, managing the crisis I'd deliberately created. On the outside, I was controlled, efficient, commanding. On the inside, something unnamed waited to break free. But not yet. Not until the work was done. The staff looked at me differently now. Not as the CEO's daughter, not as the reliable one who handled problems quietly, as the woman who just seized control of everything. I didn't plan to see Marcus again. But something pulled me toward the security office where they were holding him. Closure, perhaps, or just the satisfaction of watching him understand what had happened. The security office was a small room near the service entrance, designed for dealing with drunk guests or minor disturbances. Marcus sat in a plastic chair, 2 guards at the door, his tuxedo rumpled and stained with what looked like champagne someone had thrown at him during the chaos. His golden boy facade had completely shattered. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were red, his hands shook. The confidence that had charmed me for 2 years, that had convinced me I was loved, that had made me blind to what should have been obvious, was gone. You planned this all along. His voice came out raw and broken. The wedding, the guests, the screen, all of it. You used me. I stood just inside the doorway, keeping distance between us. No, you planned this. The espionage, the affair, the takeover. I just made sure you failed. How long? How long have you known? Long enough to watch you dig your own grave. You were very thorough, Marcus. I'll give you that. His phone sat on the table, confiscated but visible. Notifications kept flashing across the screen. I could read some of them from where I stood. Crestwood Holdings' legal department. Messages marked urgent. They're denying everything. His voice cracked. The disbelief was almost childlike. They're saying all my communications were unauthorized, that they have no knowledge of any acquisition plans. They're throwing me under the bus? I finished for him. Of course they are. You were always disposable to them, Marcus, just like I was supposed to be disposable to you. He slumped further into the chair. Elena, I did care about you. At the beginning, at least. Before Victor got involved. Before the plan became... Victor Ashford, I interrupted. Crestwood's CEO. My mother's ex-fiancé from 40 years ago. His head snapped up. You know about that? I know everything. That's the difference between us. You saw what you wanted to see. I saw what was actually there. I turned to leave. There was nothing more to say to this man. Nothing more I needed from him. Elena. His voice stopped me at the door. What happens to me now? I didn't turn around. That's not my concern anymore. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The last time I would ever speak to Marcus Thorne. My parents had retreated to one of the resort's private suites, hiding from the guests, the media, the consequences. I didn't knock when I arrived. I was done asking permission in my own family. The scene inside was pathetic in its smallness. My father pacing by the window, his distinguished silver hair disheveled for the first time I could remember. My mother seated on the couch, mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching a tissue like it could protect her from what was coming. And Vivian, curled into the corner of an armchair, still in her emerald maid of honor dress, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. They all froze when I entered. My mother recovered first, standing and reaching for me with trembling hands. Elena, please, we didn't know. We were tricked, too. Marcus deceived all of us. We never would have... I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. You knew, Mother. 2 hours ago, you accidentally confessed in front of 250 witnesses. Richard, you said she'd never find out. Remember? She flinched like I'd struck her. I meant that I didn't know the extent. I didn't understand what Marcus was really... You knew enough, I cut in. You knew enough to sign a gift deed transferring my company to a stranger. You knew enough to plan my humiliation at my own wedding. You knew enough to choose Vivian over me. Again. My father tried to summon his old authority, straightening his spine, deepening his voice. Elena, we need to discuss this rationally. The company needs stable leadership. The board will want to see a united family front. We can still control the narrative if we... The board, I interrupted, will want exactly what they're getting. Me, as CEO. Under the emergency succession clause, I have full authority until a formal review, which I will schedule when I'm ready. I'm still your father. The authority was crumbling even as he spoke. I still have connections, influence. The board members who are loyal to me will... You have nothing, Dad. I let the words land with their full weight. You signed it all away this morning. If the gift deed had worked, you'd have nothing left either. Crestwood would have gutted this company and fired you within a year. You just didn't read the fine print. You never do. He had no response. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. I turned to Vivian. She hadn't moved from her corner of the armchair, hadn't spoken, hadn't even tried to defend herself. Nothing to say? I asked. No tears? No explanations? She looked up at me with empty eyes. Would it matter? The honesty surprised me. No, I admitted, it wouldn't. I left them there, in that suite with its ocean view and its luxury furnishings and its complete bankruptcy of love. I left them to whatever future they'd built for themselves, a future that no longer included me. In the lobby, a hand touched my arm. Gentle, not demanding. Ms. Hartwell, Elena. May I have a moment? David Thorne, Marcus's father, the last person I expected to seek me out. He looked ashen, shaken, but not hostile, just deeply, profoundly sad. I need you to know something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea about any of it. The espionage, the affair, the takeover. Marcus told us he'd found the love of his life. We believed him. And you expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything. He shook his head slowly. I just needed to say it. What my son did is unforgivable. I'm ashamed to share his name. I studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the manipulation. I found only grief. I spent 35 years in corporate law before I retired, he continued. If there's anything I can do to help you prosecute this, testify, provide records, anything, I'm at your disposal. You'd testify against your own son? My son committed crimes. He tried to destroy an innocent woman. Paternal love doesn't extend to protecting that. I didn't know what to say. A father willing to hold his child accountable, something I'd never experienced with my own. I don't know what I'll need yet, I finally managed. But I appreciate the offer. He nodded and started to turn away, then stopped. Your grandmother, Margaret. I met her once, at a charity event years ago. She spoke about you with such pride. He paused, his voice thickening. She'd be proud of what you did today. The words cracked something in me. My eyes stung, my throat tightened. He walked away, leaving me with an unexpected gift. A reminder that not all parents failed their children. I needed to be alone. My grandmother's office at the resort had remained unchanged since her death. I'd refused to let anyone redecorate, refused to let anyone touch her things. Now I understood why. I'd been saving it for this moment. The door closed behind me. The lock clicked. I was finally alone. Her desk, her chair, the photo of her at the groundbreaking ceremony in 1962, young and fierce and full of dreams. The faint scent of Chanel No. 5 somehow still lingering after all these months. I sank into her chair. The leather creaked the way it always had. And then the tears came. Not for Marcus, not for Vivian, not for the parents who'd never loved me the way I needed. These tears were for her, for my grandmother, for the woman who'd seen me when no one else did, for the protector who'd planned this moment from beyond the grave. I did it, I whispered to the empty room. "I protected what you built. I hope I made you proud." A knock at the door interrupted my grief. Diane's voice muffled through the wood. "Elena, I'm sorry to disturb you, but you need to hear this." I wiped my tears quickly, straightened my spine, opened the door. Diane's expression was serious but energized. "I just got a call from a contact at the Department of Justice. The FBI wants to talk to Marcus. About Hartwell? About a pattern." She stepped inside, lowering her voice. "It turns out Crestwood has been doing this to other companies too. Corporate espionage, planted executives, hostile takeovers. At least 4 other victims in the past decade. The implications washed over me. You didn't just expose Marcus, Elena." Diane's eyes gleamed with something like admiration. "You exposed an entire criminal enterprise. The FBI wants to know everything you know." I stood in my grandmother's office, tears still drying on my cheeks, as the scope of what I'd uncovered continued to expand. I'd wanted revenge. I'd gotten justice. And apparently I'd just started something much bigger than myself. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the man who'd planned to steal my company was explaining himself to federal investigators. 14 days after the wedding, that wasn't. The news cycle had moved on to other scandals, other outrages, other entertainment. But the legal machinery was just getting started, grinding forward with the slow inevitability of justice. I watched the footage from my office at Hartwell Hospitality headquarters. Marcus Thorne in handcuffs. The perp walk from the FBI field office to a waiting vehicle. His face gaunt, his expensive suit replaced by the rumpled clothes of a man who'd been answering questions for hours. The charming smile that had fooled me for 2 years was nowhere to be seen. The charges scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Wire fraud, corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Each count carrying years of federal prison time. My USB drive had been just the beginning. The FBI had found much more. Offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland, encrypted communications with Crestwood executives spanning 7 years, a pattern of infiltration and theft stretching across 4 other companies before Hartwell, hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property and manipulated stock prices. I'd expected to feel satisfaction watching him shuffle toward that car, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions he couldn't answer. Instead, I felt something closer to exhaustion. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was a cancer finally being excised, necessary but not joyful. The media had given me a new nickname, the Ice Queen of Monterey. Some tabloid had coined it, meant as an insult, painting me as cold and calculating for exposing my fiancé at our wedding. I took it as a compliment. Cold had saved my company. Cold had protected my grandmother's legacy. Warm had almost destroyed everything. The intercom on my desk buzzed. "Ms. Hartwell, there's a call from someone who says she's your sister. She's been trying to reach you for 3 days. 3 days of declined calls, blocked numbers, emails sent straight to trash." Something made me pause this time. "Put her through." The line clicked. Vivian's voice came through, hoarse and desperate. Nothing like the confident golden child who'd stood beside Marcus at my altar. "Elena, please." "The FBI subpoenaed me. They're saying I could be charged as an accomplice. I didn't know about the espionage, I swear. I just fell in love with him. That's all it was. I made a mistake." I let her words hang in the silence. Let her feel the weight of asking me for help. "I'm your sister, Elena. Your blood. We grew up together. Please, you have to help me." I kept my voice calm, controlled. "You stopped being my sister when you tried to destroy me." Her gasp was audible through the phone, the genuine shock of someone who'd never expected to hear the word no. "I made a mistake," she tried again. "A terrible mistake. But we're family. Family forgives. Family helps each other. Family protects each other," I corrected her. "Family doesn't conspire to humiliate each other at their own wedding. Family doesn't call each other pathetic and irrelevant and obstacle. Those were your words, Vivian, your voice, played for 250 people. You can't unsay them. Elena, I'm begging you." Her voice broke into sobs. "I'll lose everything. My reputation, my freedom, my whole life is falling apart. You should have thought about that before you tried to take mine." I hung up, gently, no slam, no drama. Just the quiet click of a door closing permanently. My hands were steady, my heart was calm. The guilt I'd expected to feel never came. 3 days later, I stood at the head of the boardroom table on the 24th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco skyline, the city gleaming in afternoon light. 12 board members sat in leather chairs around the polished table. Diane Chen occupied the legal counsel position. 2 chairs sat empty. My father's and mother's. The motion was read aloud. All in favor of confirming Elena Hartwell as permanent chief executive officer of Hartwell Hospitality Group, replacing interim emergency authority with full executive powers. 12 hands rose. 12-0, unanimous. The weight of it settled over me. Not just a job title, a legacy. My grandmother's company, officially in my hands. "Thank you for your confidence," I said. "I won't let you down. I won't let her down." Everyone in the room understood who I meant. Diane stood to address the second motion. "There's additional business. The matter of board composition following recent events." She read from the prepared document. "All in favor of removing Richard and Catherine Hartwell from the board of directors, effective immediately, citing conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary duty." 12 hands rose again. 12-0. I'd expected to feel something. Guilt, perhaps, for stripping my parents of their positions. Grief for the family I was officially dismantling. Instead, I felt only relief. A tumor removed. A wound finally able to heal. Board members approached me afterward. Handshakes, congratulations. Several admitted they'd suspected my parents' mismanagement for years, but lacked the evidence or authority to act. One board member, a woman my grandmother's age who'd served since the 1990s, pulled me aside. "Your grandmother lobbied for years to limit your father's influence," she confided. "We thought she was being paranoid. Turns out she was being prescient. I wasn't the only one grandmother had been protecting. She'd been fighting battles I'd never seen." The letter arrived 3 days later, no return address, but the postmark was from a federal detention facility. Marcus's handwriting on the envelope, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and love notes and a prenup he'd never actually read. I sat in my living room, the letter in my hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened. Another part needed to know what he could possibly say. I slit the envelope. "Dear Elena," it began, "I know you have every reason to hate me, but I need you to understand something. I did love you, in my own way. At the beginning, at least, before Victor pulled me into this. Before the plan became bigger than both of us." I skimmed the pages. Excuses, justifications. Blaming Victor Ashford for corrupting him. Blaming Crestwood's pressure for forcing his hand. Blaming everyone and everything except himself. The manipulation came near the end. If you could find it in your heart to speak on my behalf at sentencing, your word could make a difference. You could tell them I wasn't the mastermind. You could explain that I was just a pawn in something much larger. I walked to the fireplace, struck a match. The paper caught immediately, edges curling, words blackening, his pleas turning to ash. I didn't finish reading. I didn't need to. Whatever truth or lies those pages contained, they were no longer my concern. I watched the flames die. The ashes settled. Not just burning a letter, burning the last thread connecting me to the life I'd almost lost. The doorbell rang 3 evenings later. I wasn't expecting anyone. My father stood on the doorstep. Richard Hartwell, former patriarch of the family dynasty, looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit was rumpled, his silver hair uncombed. He'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. I didn't open the door fully, just enough to see him, just enough for him to know he wasn't welcome inside. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said. His voice had lost its commanding quality, or ask forgiveness. I know I don't deserve either. I waited, giving him nothing. Your grandmother gave me something, years ago, made me promise to give it to you if things turned out this way. What do you mean this way? If you won. His eyes dropped to the ground. If you defeated us. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Old, yellowed, my grandmother's handwriting unmistakable across the front. For Elena. After the victory. She knew Elena. His voice cracked. She knew this would happen someday. Made me swear on her deathbed that I'd give this to you if you ever had to fight your own family. I didn't think you would. I never imagined it would come to this. A tear slid down his weathered cheek. I'm sorry. For everything. I took the envelope, said nothing. He turned and shuffled back to his car. A broken man, a father who'd failed in every way that mattered. His taillights disappeared into the evening darkness. I stood in my doorway, the envelope pressed against my chest, heavy with secrets, heavy with love from beyond the grave. Grandmother had prepared for this. She'd known I would win even when I hadn't known I was fighting. What else had she seen? What else had she left for me to discover? The envelope waited in my hands. Another message from the dead. Another layer of protection I'd never known existed. 6 weeks. That's how long it took for the silence to stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like peace. 2 months since the wedding. 6 weeks since I'd driven down the Pacific Coast Highway with nothing but a bag and my grandmother's address. The cottage sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, small and weathered, cedar shingles turned silver by decades of salt air. A wraparound porch faced the water. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. It was exactly the kind of place my grandmother would have loved, and exactly nothing like the luxury I'd grown up performing in. The first days had been the hardest. The silence was deafening. No meetings to prepare for, no emails demanding immediate response, no crises to manage, no family to accommodate. No one needed me for anything. After 32 years of being essential, being unnecessary felt like drowning. I wandered from room to room, not knowing what to do with myself, made meals I barely tasted, slept in fits and starts, stood on the porch watching the waves for hours, my mind racing through everything that had happened, everything that had almost happened, everything I'd lost and gained and become. But slowly something shifted. I discovered my grandmother's presence everywhere in that cottage. Her books lined the shelves, dog-eared and annotated in her careful handwriting. Her cardigan still hung on the back of a bedroom chair, faded blue wool that smelled faintly of her perfume. In the kitchen, her favorite teapot waited on the counter, Earl Grey still in the canister beside it. She'd given me this place to find myself. The least I could do was try. I built a routine. Wake with the sun, tea on the porch, watching the fog lift from the water, walk the coastal trails in the afternoon, my legs growing stronger with each passing day. Simple meals in the evening, early sleep, dreams that weren't nightmares anymore. For the first time in my life, I existed without an audience. No one watching, no one judging, no one expecting anything. And slowly, I began to remember who I was when I wasn't performing. In my grandmother's desk, I found a stack of blank journals. Beautiful leather covers, creamy pages waiting to be filled. A note was tucked inside the first one, her handwriting unmistakable. For when you need to hear your own voice. I hadn't journaled since college, hadn't written anything personal in years. Everything I produced was professional. Reports, analyses, presentations, words designed to inform and persuade, never to feel. The first entry took an hour to begin. I sat on the porch at sunset, pen in hand, staring at the empty page. Finally, I wrote a single question. Who am I when I'm not being the strong one? The answer took weeks to find, but once I started writing, I couldn't stop. Everything poured out. The memories I'd buried, the feelings I'd denied, the moments I'd pretended didn't hurt. I wrote about being 7 years old, waiting for my mother to attend my school play, watching every other child receive a hug while I stood alone. I wrote about being 16, holding my Exeter acceptance letter, watching my mother turn away to comfort Vivian over a forgotten homework assignment. I wrote about every promotion that went unacknowledged, every achievement that was overshadowed, every time I'd made myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I'd been erasing myself for so long I'd forgotten I existed. And then came the anger, the rage I'd never allowed myself to feel. Pages and pages about what they'd done, what they'd stolen, what they'd never even noticed they were taking. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed, sometimes both at once. The anger didn't poison me the way I'd feared. It clarified, it cleansed. It showed me exactly what I'd lost and what I was determined to reclaim. After 2 weeks, the entries started to change. Less about them, more about me. The question evolved from, why did they do this to me, to, what do I want my life to be? The answer was still forming. But for the first time, it was my answer. Not a reaction to their neglect, not a compensation for their failures. Mine. The town nearest the cottage had exactly 3 blocks, a general store, a cafe, a bookshop called Pacific Pages with a weathered sign and salt-crusted windows. I went looking for something to read and found something else entirely. The man behind the counter was about my grandmother's age. White beard, reading glasses perched on his nose, a paperback open in his hands. He looked up when I entered, and his face shifted from polite welcome to something more. "You're Margaret's granddaughter." He set down his book. "She said you'd show up eventually. Took you long enough." The words stopped me in the doorway. "You knew my grandmother?" "Daniel Webb." He extended a hand, his grip warm and firm. "Owned this shop for 40 years. Your grandmother was my most loyal customer. And, I like to think, my friend. He'd been the one maintaining the cottage all these years, checking the pipes before winter, trimming the hedges in spring, making sure the roof didn't leak, all at my grandmother's request, with payments sent quarterly from a trust I'd never known existed. Margaret always said you'd need this place someday." His eyes crinkled with something between sadness and warmth. I didn't ask why, wasn't my business to know. A friendship developed, not the complicated kind, weighted with history and expectation, something simpler. Weekly visits to the bookshop, browsing the shelves while Daniel recommended novels I'd never have chosen myself. Coffee on his porch Sunday mornings, conversations about books and grief and the strange business of starting over. His wife Eleanor had died 8 years ago. He'd rebuilt his life in the aftermath, smaller, quieter, but genuinely his. One Sunday, he looked at me over his reading glasses with that knowing expression he sometimes wore. "You've got that look your grandmother had when she first came here, like you're waiting for permission to be happy." I turned my coffee cup in my hands. I'm not waiting for permission. I'm trying to remember what happy feels like. He nodded slowly. "That's a better answer than Margaret gave at first. Took her 3 years to stop running from herself." "What changed?" She realized she'd been so busy surviving that she'd forgotten to live. He smiled at the memory. "Seems to me you're figuring that out a lot faster than she did. What are you going to do with the rest of your life, Elena? Not the company, not the revenge. You." The question caught me off guard, but the answer came easily, surprising in its simplicity. I'm going to live it. For myself, finally. Daniel's smile widened. Margaret would like that answer. News from the outside world arrived in fragments. A text from Diane. "Marcus Thorne pleads guilty. 8 years federal prison." He'd taken a deal. Testified against Crestwood in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victor Ashford, the CEO who'd orchestrated everything, was now under investigation himself. I read the headline, waited for satisfaction to arrive. It didn't. Just a quiet acknowledgement. A chapter closed. A problem solved. Marcus had become irrelevant to my story. His fate no longer mattered to me. Another update a week later. Vivian had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with the FBI, testified that she hadn't known about the corporate espionage, only the affair. She'd moved to Florida, changed her name, started over somewhere no one knew the Hartwell scandal. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no forgiveness, just absence. She'd removed herself from my life. That was enough. A letter arrived, forwarded from my San Francisco address. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. 4 pages of apology and explanation and justification. I know I failed you. I know I chose Vivian too many times. But I'm your mother, Elena. Doesn't that count for something? I read it once, folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer. No reply, not because of anger, because I wasn't ready. And I was done doing things before I was ready. Some questions didn't need immediate answers. Some could simply be held. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks into my retreat. I was on the porch, journal in my lap, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of fire. The first genuine contentment I'd felt in years. Diane's name on the screen. She only called when it mattered. Elena, I'm sorry to disturb you. Her voice was apologetic but urgent. Something's happened. The board needs you. I listened as she explained. Crestwood Holdings was imploding. The FBI investigation had destroyed their stock value. Their assets were being liquidated. Several of their resort properties, including 3 that had been direct competitors to Hartwell, were going up for auction. The company that tried to destroy you is now being sold off piece by piece. Diane's voice held a note of wonder. And Hartwell is in a position to buy. But the board won't move without you. This is too big a decision for anyone else to make. I looked out at the ocean. The waves kept their eternal rhythm, unconcerned with corporate acquisitions and family legacies. I know you needed this time, Diane continued. And you can take more if you want. But Elena, this is your grandmother's legacy. This is the company she built. And now you have a chance to make it bigger than she ever imagined. I'd come here broken. I was leaving not fixed, but healing. Not complete, but becoming. Running the company wasn't running away from myself. It was honoring what I'd built, what she'd built. Schedule the meeting. I'll be there Monday. I packed my bag that evening. The journal went inside, filled with 6 weeks of excavation and discovery. The sapphire ring stayed on my finger. The cottage would wait for my return. Because now I knew something I hadn't known before. I could leave and come back. I could lead and still heal. I didn't have to choose. They'd tried to destroy Hartwell Hospitality by infiltrating it. Now I was going to build it on the ashes of their failure. Grandmother would have appreciated the irony. 6 months. In 6 months, I'd gone from almost losing everything to owning pieces of the company that tried to destroy me. My office at Hartwell Hospitality headquarters looked different now. Not the furniture, though I'd replaced my father's heavy mahogany desk with something lighter, more modern. What had changed was the energy. My grandmother's portrait hung on the wall behind me, watching over everything I did. Her books lined the shelves. The sapphire ring she'd left me caught the light every time I signed a document. The acquisition had closed 3 weeks ago. 3 premium resort properties that had once belonged to Crestwood Holdings now flew the Hartwell banner. Properties I'd studied for years as competition. Properties that had been funded in part by the corporate espionage Crestwood had conducted against companies like ours, $47 million, a fraction of their true value, desperation sales from a company hemorrhaging assets and credibility. I'd conducted the acquisition professionally, no gloating, no victory speeches, no press releases emphasizing the irony of buying our enemies' crown jewels for pennies on the dollar. The best revenge was success, not cruelty. Grandmother had taught me that. The board meeting had just concluded. 12 faces that had once been my father's allies, now firmly in my corner. We'd reviewed the integration plans, the staffing decisions, the rebranding timeline, everything moving forward with the precision I'd built my career on. Your grandmother would be proud. The words came from Helen Park, the board member who'd known Margaret longest. You've doubled the company's footprint in 6 months. She would be proud, I agreed, not of the size, of the way I'd built it, without becoming what I'd fought against. Diane knocked and entered without waiting, her expression carrying that particular weight that meant significant news. Victor Ashford was indicted this morning. She set a folder on my desk. 15 counts of securities fraud, corporate espionage, and RICO violations. I opened the folder, scanned the charges. The FBI had traced his pattern back 2 decades. 12 companies infiltrated and destroyed, hundreds of millions in stolen assets. Marcus had been just one of many operatives in a criminal enterprise that had finally been exposed. Did they find any connection to my mother? I asked. To their history? Diane shook her head. The FBI found no evidence Catherine was involved or even aware of Victor's activities. As far as they can tell, he targeted Hartwell because of the company's value, not personal history. I considered this. My mother's college sweetheart had tried to destroy her daughter's company. Coincidence seemed too convenient. But perhaps the truth was simpler than I'd imagined. Perhaps Victor had simply recognized an opportunity when Marcus reported back about the family he'd infiltrated. Some questions didn't have satisfying answers. Some mysteries would remain unsolved. Victor's personal assets are being seized, Diane continued. His art collection, his yacht, his homes in 3 countries. He'll likely die in prison. He's 73 and the minimum sentence for his charges is 20 years. I let this information settle. Not satisfaction, not pity, just acknowledgement. He'd built an empire on theft and deception. Now it was ash. Thank you for telling me. I closed the folder. What's next on the agenda? Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. That's it? No celebration? His destruction isn't my achievement. Building something better is. Let's focus on that. She smiled, understanding. The agenda continued. The email from my mother arrived that afternoon. Formal, careful, nothing like the manipulation I'd grown up with. A request to meet. In person, not at the family home, a neutral location. Coffee, if you're willing. No expectations, just a conversation. No guilt trips, no appeals to blood, no demands, just an ask. I read it 3 times looking for the hidden hook, the subtle pressure, the familiar pattern of making me feel obligated. I couldn't find it. The cafe in Pacific Heights was small and anonymous, the kind of place where nobody would recognize us. She was already seated when I arrived, her back to the window, a cup of tea cooling in front of her. She looked different, older than 6 months ago, thinner. The polish was still there, but something underneath had softened, or maybe broken. Thank you for coming. Her voice was quiet. I wasn't sure you would. I sat across from her. I wasn't sure I would either. Silence stretched between us, neither of us knowing how to bridge 3 decades of damage. I've been in therapy, she finally said, since the wedding, trying to understand how I became someone who could do what I did. I waited, giving her nothing, making her find her own words. I told myself I was protecting Vivian, her hands wrapped around her teacup like a lifeline, that you were strong enough to handle anything, that you didn't need me the way she did, the familiar justification, the story she'd told herself for 30 years. But that was a lie, she continued, her voice cracking. You needed me. You were just too proud to show it, and I was too comfortable to look. I let her words hang in the air, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Her eyes finally met mine. I know I haven't earned it. I'm asking for a chance. To show you I can be different. To build something, even if it's small. Even if it takes years. I studied her face, looking for performance, for manipulation, for the mother I'd known my entire life. What I saw was different. Uncertainty, vulnerability, genuine fear that I would say no. I don't know if I can give you that, I said honestly, but I can give you this. I'm willing to try, slowly, with boundaries. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Quiet ones. Not the theatrical crying she'd deployed throughout my childhood. That's more than I deserve. It's not about deserving. I kept my voice even. It's about me being ready. I'm not doing this for you, Mom. I'm doing it for me. To see if I can hold on to myself while letting someone back in. We finished our coffee. Agreed to meet again next month. No hug at the end, no promises of reconciliation. Just two women walking out of a cafe, agreeing to try something neither of us knew how to do. A beginning, not an ending. The gala invitation had gone out weeks ago. Hartwell Hospitality's annual celebration, normally held at our San Francisco property. This year, I'd insisted on Monterey. The same resort, the same garden, the same spot where I'd been slapped and humiliated exactly 1 year ago. My team had suggested a different venue. Too many bad memories, they'd said. Too much potential for uncomfortable questions. But I'd been firm. That garden wouldn't own me. Those ghosts wouldn't define that space forever. I would stand where everything had ended and show them where everything had begun. The evening before the gala, I walked through the garden alone. The chairs hadn't been set up yet. The altar was gone, replaced by an empty platform where a stage would stand tomorrow. The string quartet was silent, the flowers not yet arranged, but the ocean still whispered behind the cliffs. The salt air still carried the scent of wild sage. The sunset still painted the sky in shades of fire and gold. I stood where I'd stood 1 year ago, the exact spot where Marcus's hand had connected with my face, where Vivian had accepted his proposal, where my family had watched my destruction with smiles on their faces. I felt nothing but peace. I did it, grandmother. The words came out loud, carried away by the evening breeze. Everything you hoped for, everything you prepared for. The company is safe. I'm safe. The silence answered back, full of presence rather than absence. But I'm still learning the second part. The part about not letting bitterness win, about being more than a survivor, about living. I'll keep trying, for you, for me, for whoever I'm becoming. Footsteps behind me interrupted the moment. Diane's voice, concerned. Elena? There's someone here to see you. Who would come the night before the gala unannounced? A figure emerged from the darkness. Not threatening, hesitant. David Thorne, Marcus's father. The man who'd offered to testify against his own son. I know I shouldn't be here. His voice was low, urgent. But there's something you need to know. About Victor Ashford. About why he really targeted your family. I turned to face him fully. The ocean churned behind me. The sky was darkening, the first stars appearing. What do you mean, really targeted? Victor didn't choose Hartwell randomly. David stepped closer. And it wasn't about your mother's broken engagement 40 years ago. It was about your grandmother. About something that happened in 1961, before the company existed, before any of it. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and coming rain. 1 year since the worst day of my life. And the secrets were still unfolding. Victor Ashford didn't target Hartwell randomly. David's voice was steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. And it wasn't about your mother's broken engagement 40 years ago. We stood in the darkening garden, the same ground where my life had shattered and been rebuilt. The ocean crashed against the cliffs below, indifferent to human drama. It was about your grandmother, David continued. Margaret rejected Victor in 1961. Before she built the company, before she married your grandfather, he proposed to her, and she said no. I felt the pieces clicking into place, a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. She told him he was too ambitious, too ruthless, too willing to destroy others to get what he wanted. David shook his head slowly. Victor never forgave her for seeing through him. He spent 60 years building an empire specifically to destroy what she built. Marcus was just the latest tool in a decades-long vendetta. 60 years, an entire lifetime consumed by rejection, by wounded pride, by the desperate need to prove wrong a woman who'd seen him clearly when he was still young enough to change. She rejected him because she saw who he really was, I said quietly. And he spent 60 years becoming exactly what she saw. David nodded. The cruelest revenge would have been proving her wrong. Instead, he proved her right. Every company he destroyed, every life he ruined, every crime he committed confirmed her judgment. I thought about Victor Ashford sitting in a federal detention facility, facing charges that would keep him imprisoned until he died, still obsessed with a woman who'd seen through him 6 decades ago. "That's not power," I said. "That's pathology." "Your grandmother was right to reject him." David's voice softened. "And she raised you to be just like her." He left me alone in the garden with that truth. A final piece of understanding. Victor's story wasn't about me. It wasn't even about my company. It was about a man who couldn't accept rejection from a woman smarter than him. And in the end, his obsession had destroyed him. The next evening, the garden was transformed. 500 guests instead of 250. Crystal chandeliers strung between the trees, casting warm light across elegantly dressed crowds. The altar where I'd been humiliated was gone, replaced by a stage where I would soon address the people who'd believed in Hartwell Hospitality's future. I stood backstage watching them arrive, investors who'd stayed loyal during the scandal, partners who'd expanded their commitments, employees who'd worked overtime to integrate the new properties. My mother, seated near the back, keeping her promise to stay within the boundaries we'd established. 1 year ago, I'd stood in this garden in a wedding dress, waiting to be destroyed. Tonight, I stood in a tailored navy suit, waiting to celebrate. The applause began the moment I stepped onto the stage. 500 faces looking up at me. 500 people who'd watched the scandal unfold and chosen to believe in what came after. 1 year ago, I said into the microphone, I stood in this garden for a different kind of ceremony. Most of you know what happened. Some of you were there. A ripple of knowing murmurs moved through the crowd. I'm not here to talk about that day. I'm here to talk about what we've built since. I walked them through the acquisition, the new properties, the employees we'd retained, the partnerships we'd forged, the future we were building together. I talked about growth and opportunity and the resilience of a company that had survived its darkest hour. What I didn't mention was Marcus, or Vivian, or the betrayal that had started everything. They didn't deserve space in this celebration. Everything we've accomplished this year, I continued, everything we'll accomplish in the years ahead, is built on a foundation one woman laid 60 years ago. Behind me, a curtain dropped, revealing my grandmother's portrait, a new permanent installation for the resort lobby. Margaret Hartwell at 40, fierce and determined, the ocean behind her, the future ahead. Margaret Hartwell taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about what you build after you get back up. This company is her legacy, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure it honors her. The applause that followed was genuine, sustained, for her, not just for me. Afterward, my mother approached me hesitantly, uncertain whether she was welcome. "That was beautiful, Elena." Her voice was quiet. Margaret would have loved it. I nodded. "Not warm, but not cold. Thank you for coming. We weren't healed. We might never be. But we were trying. And trying was enough for tonight." Midnight found me alone in the garden. The guests had gone. The staff had cleared the glasses and folded the chairs. The chandeliers still glittered in the trees, but the music had stopped and silence had reclaimed the space. I walked to where the altar had once stood, the exact spot where Marcus had slapped me, where Vivian had accepted his proposal, where my life had ended and begun in the same moment. I felt nothing but peace. What they had wanted was simple: to destroy me, to erase me, to take everything I'd built and leave me with nothing. What they had achieved was nothing, less than nothing. They'd freed me from a family that had never deserved me, freed me from a man who had never loved me, freed me from a lifetime of performing for people who would never see me clearly. What I had gained was everything: a company, a legacy, a grandmother's love finally understood, a sense of self that no one could take away, a cottage by the sea where I could heal, a friend named Daniel who expected nothing, a mother who was learning, slowly, to change. What I had lost was nothing that had ever truly been mine. The truth I'd learned was simple, and it had taken me 32 years to understand it. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It only protects the people who are hurting you. When you silence yourself to make others comfortable, you're not being noble. You're not being strong. You're participating in your own erasure. Speaking up hadn't saved anyone else. My parents were still who they were. Vivian was still who she was. But speaking up had saved me. And that was enough. They hadn't destroyed me. They'd freed me. I wasn't the strong one anymore. I wasn't the invisible daughter. I wasn't the designated shock absorber for everyone else's dysfunction. I was just Elena. Finally, completely, unapologetically myself. They'd wanted a wedding they'd never forget. They'd gotten a woman they'd never break. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to know something. I'm not special. I'm not uniquely strong or particularly brave. What happened to me wasn't extraordinary. It was a pattern that plays out in families everywhere, every single day. The designated strong one. The invisible daughter. The person expected to absorb everyone else's pain without complaint because you can handle it. Maybe that person is you. Maybe you've spent years being told that setting boundaries is selfish. That protecting yourself means you're not a team player. That if you really loved your family, you'd just forgive and move on. Maybe you're sitting there right now, wondering if you're overreacting, if you're being too sensitive, if you should just try harder to make peace. I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me 20 years ago. Your instincts are right. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. If a relationship consistently damages you, you have every right to protect yourself. Even if that relationship is with family. Especially if it's with family, because those are the people who can hurt you most deeply and hide behind love while doing it. Silence protects everyone except you. Speaking up saves you. And you're worth saving. I want to hear from you. Have you been the designated strong one in your family? Have you ever set a boundary and been told you were being selfish? Have you experienced the cost of silence or the freedom of finally speaking up? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters. Your voice matters. And I promise you, there are other people listening who need to hear that they're not alone. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in any part of my journey, I'm asking you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. There are more stories like this one. Stories about women who refused to stay broken, who rebuilt their lives from ruins, who learned that self-protection isn't selfishness. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. That friend who's always sacrificing for family members who give nothing back. That sister who's been told she's too sensitive when she asks for basic respect. That woman who's been conditioned to believe her needs don't matter. Third, leave a comment telling me what boundary you're going to set this week. It can be small, it can be simple, but commit to one act of self-protection and share it here so we can support each other. You deserve relationships that honor you, not diminish you. You deserve a life where your voice matters. You deserve to be more than the strong one who exists to absorb everyone else's pain. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, and remember, silence protects everyone except you. But speaking up, that saves you. And you're worth saving. I'll see you in the next video. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.